It was the night of August 24th, 2001. An Air Transat Airbus A330, Flight 236, prepared for a routine journey from Toronto, Canada to Lisbon, Portugal. On board, 293 passengers and 13 crew members, families, couples, travelers, all expecting a calm overnight flight across the Atlantic. In the cockpit sat Captain Robert Pichet, a 48-year-old veteran with over 16,000 flight hours, and his first officer, Dirk de Jager, a sharp young pilot with steady nerves. As the aircraft ascended into the calm, starry sky, everything seemed normal. The engines hummed perfectly, the crew served dinner, and the cabin filled with soft chatter and dimmed lights. Captain Pichet glanced at the instruments. Everything looked perfect: fuel levels, altitude, temperature, all within limits. At 39,000 feet, they were flying steady, slicing through clouds with quiet confidence. But in life, sometimes even when everything seems perfect, something unseen begins to unfold. Something that tests the limits of human courage. Far below the aircraft, hidden in the left engine, a fuel line had developed a small leak, caused by a faulty part from a maintenance error. It wasn't visible. It wasn't alarming. But drop by drop, gallon by gallon, the airplane began losing fuel across the Atlantic Ocean. In the cabin, passengers rested peacefully, unaware that the lifeblood of the aircraft was slowly draining away. And yet, inside the cockpit, Captain Pichet's instincts were awake. After nearly 4 hours into the flight, small irregularities appeared on the engine readings. Fuel imbalance lights flickered. The right tank seemed fuller than the left. De Jager checked the system. "It's probably a sensor error," he said. But Pichet didn't believe in coincidences. He ordered cross-feed checks, verified the fuel transfer, and continued watching every gauge. The A330 continued gliding smoothly across the endless Atlantic darkness. While inside, the pilots began to realize something wasn't right. In that quiet cockpit, lit only by instrument glow, 2 men sat thousands of miles from land, and one wrong decision could mean the difference between life and death. Captain Pichet leaned back slightly, eyes locked on the fuel indicators. His gut whispered something that logic could not yet prove. We're losing fuel. Something's happening, and we don't see it yet. That was the moment the fight for 306 lives silently began. The flight crossed halfway over the Atlantic, far from any land, radar, or rescue. Captain Pichet's focus stayed locked on the fuel readings. They didn't make sense. According to the instruments, both engines still had enough fuel for hours. But the warning lights kept flashing, irregular, subtle, almost teasing. A flicker, then silence, then again. "Something's draining us," Pichet murmured. He ordered his co-pilot, "Let's check again. Crossfeed valves, pumps, everything." The crew followed procedures perfectly, yet the real enemy was invisible, a massive fuel leak pouring into the night sky. With every passing minute, thousands of pounds of fuel escaped unnoticed, fading into the darkness like vaporized hope. Then, at 5:36 a.m., alarms erupted. The left engine pressure dropped sharply, the cockpit filled with red lights and warning sounds. "Engine 1 losing fuel pressure," shouted de Jager. Within seconds, the left engine died. The passengers felt the aircraft shudder. Coffee cups trembled, children stirred awake, and a deep, unsettling silence spread through the cabin. Pichet took control. "Mayday, Mayday, Air Transat 236 declaring fuel emergency," he radioed calmly. The nearest airport? Lajes Field, a military base in the Azores Islands, still over 120 miles away. The right engine struggled to keep them in the air. Every second now mattered. The pilots rerouted all remaining power, shut down non-essential systems, and began descending slowly to conserve altitude. But the nightmare wasn't over. Only 13 minutes later, the second engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The entire aircraft went silent. For the first time, 306 people were flying in complete darkness and silence, gliding without power, over one of the deepest parts of the Atlantic Ocean. No engines, no fuel, no control. Just a 200-ton metal bird silently falling through the clouds with nothing but the will of two men to save everyone on board. In the cabin, panic began. Passengers held hands, mothers prayed, and some whispered goodbye messages to loved ones. Yet inside the cockpit, Captain Pichet's voice remained steady, calm, focused, unbroken. He turned to de Jager and said quietly, "We're not dying today. Not like this." With no power, no engines, and no radar, he began a manual glide, something no pilot had ever done at that altitude, in that aircraft, with that weight. For the next 19 minutes, they would attempt the impossible, to glide a completely powerless Airbus A330 across the Atlantic and somehow reach a tiny island runway that barely fit the plane's size. It was the longest 19 minutes in aviation history. The Airbus A330 sliced through the cold Atlantic air, both engines dead, the ocean glimmering below like a sheet of black glass. Inside the cockpit, only emergency lights flickered, powered by the plane's ram air turbine, a small windmill-like device that gave minimal electricity for basic instruments. But that wasn't enough. Not to steer, not to restart, not to survive. Captain Robert Pichet's hands gripped the controls firmly. He knew exactly what this meant. They were flying a 126-ton glider, and every second of descent counted. De Jager scanned their instruments, voice trembling. Altitude 33,000 feet and dropping. Distance to Azores, 120 miles. Pichet nodded slowly. "Then we have to glide all the way there. Keep calm, Michel." He wasn't just calm. He was calculating, visualizing every movement of air, every mile of loss, every drop of remaining hope. At this altitude, they had roughly 20 minutes of glide time. If they wasted even 1 degree of descent, they'd never reach land. In the cabin, fear was spreading like fire. Oxygen masks dangled, lights dimmed, and the sound of wind rushing past the fuselage filled the silence. A mother clutched her child, whispering prayers through tears. A young man wrote, "I love you" on a napkin, just in case someone found it. But in the cockpit, no one gave up. Pichet radioed once more. "Azores control. This is Air Transat 236. We've lost both engines. No fuel. We are gliding toward you." The air traffic controller's voice came back, stunned but steady. "Roger that. Air Transat 236. You're too far, Captain. Too far to make it." Pichet didn't reply. He refused to believe it. As they crossed the point of no return, the captain turned the aircraft slightly, trimming the angle, finding the best glide ratio possible. Every movement had to be perfect. One mistake, and they'd hit the ocean. The cabin crew, led by Chief Attendant Guy Lin, kept the passengers calm. She walked through the aisle, holding people's hands, telling them to trust the pilots. And slowly, impossibly, they began to see faint outlines of land, the Azores, breaking through the clouds. But Leje's field was still miles away. They had altitude for maybe 3 more minutes of flight. The descent rate was brutal. Every alarm blared, warning of stall, terrain, airspeed, yet there was nothing they could do. De Jager shouted, "We're too high to ditch and too low to land." But Pichet's instincts took over. "Hold on," he said, and rolled the aircraft slightly to bleed off speed, a move no Airbus manual could teach. He was flying it like a fighter jet now, not a passenger plane. Through sweat, fear, and pure will, he aligned the silent aircraft toward the island runway. It was still a distant gray strip, small, narrow, but visible. He whispered to himself, "Come on, just a little further." Then the unthinkable. The hydraulics began to fail. Without them, he could barely move the controls. It felt like wrestling a giant machine through a hurricane, but somehow, Against every rule of physics, the aircraft kept gliding. The island grew larger. The runway came into sight. There was no time for checklists. No power, no flaps, no second chance. Only one shot to land 306 souls. And at that very moment, as the coastline flashed below them and alarms screamed louder than ever, Captain Robert Pichet made a choice. He would not let go. The runway of Layas Field appeared like a sliver of hope on the horizon, narrow, short, and surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean. Inside the cockpit, Captain Robert Pichet's hands were steady, eyes laser-focused. His co-pilot, Dirk de Jager, watched every movement, every tiny adjustment, both aware that 306 lives depended on the next 60 seconds. The aircraft descended, silently slicing through the morning mist. Without engines, the plane's brakes were ineffective, flaps powerless, and hydraulics failing. Yet Pichet had mastered the glide, managing speed and angle with the precision of a surgeon. In the cabin, passengers braced for impact. Some whispered prayers, some held loved ones tighter than ever. The tension was unbearable, every heartbeat echoing in the silent metallic fuselage. Then, finally, the tires of the Airbus A330 kissed the tarmac, a miracle in motion. The aircraft skidded down the runway, bouncing slightly but stayed on course. Smoke rose from the wheels as friction met desperation. The runway seemed too short, the plane too heavy. Yet against every calculation, against every expectation, it stopped. 306 lives saved, every single one. The cabin erupted in tears, laughter, and silent relief. Passengers embraced strangers, mothers wept, fathers held their children tighter than ever, and in the cockpit, Captain Pichet allowed himself a small smile. Calm, composed, yet quietly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened, news spread around the world. This wasn't just another flight. It was a story of human courage, skill, and unwavering determination. In the years since, Captain Pichet became a symbol, a reminder that, even when all seems lost, when engines fail, fuel runs out, and hope is gone, courage and determination can turn the impossible into reality. The Air Transat Flight 236 landing was more than an aviation miracle. It was a lesson for all of us, a lesson in staying calm under pressure, a lesson in trust, teamwork, and relentless perseverance. A lesson that no matter how dire the situation, human courage can overcome even the most impossible odds. And as the plane rested on the runway, the sun rose over the Azores, casting golden light across a world that had just witnessed a true miracle in the sky.